I'm going to misquote Orwell and propose to you that in a hierarchical society, the purpose of the media is to wind us all up. I thought of that when I saw a video of an incident involving a young woman and the police in West Yorkshire. Now, I'm not going to suggest that arresting someone, whether in their own home or in a public place, for just using benign words that are taken the wrong way is a sufficient ground for arrest, let alone prosecution of an offence. As the administrative judge, His Honour Julian Knowles KC, said in the ruling I quote here, "This country has never had a Shaker or Gestapo or Stasi. I'm sure there are people buried in the police and the establishment who would like us to have such things, but we don't have that tradition. Yet, whether an arrest is right or wrong is going to depend on the circumstances, and we need to know all the circumstances, not just the angle that the media want us to see. I'm not going to show the original footage because the incident I discuss here involves a 16-year-old girl. It's not against the law to show footage of a minor, and you can find the footage online easily enough, but here I'll just summarise it. It's filmed by the mother and shows the young woman cowering in the corner while police officers and the mother loudly argue. The police have decided to arrest the young woman, and the footage then shows her being taken away by about 6 or 7 police officers. She's clearly drunk and falls on the ground at least once. Let's look at the statement about this from West Yorkshire Police. In relation to an incident in Leeds on Monday, where a 16-year-old girl was arrested on suspicion of a homophobic public order offence, West Yorkshire Police have now reviewed the evidence and made the decision to take no further action. That's the first paragraph. If you read in full, it has clearly been written under political pressure, but it is the case that Section 4A of the Public Order Act includes a defence in subsection 2 that no public order offence is committed in the home, and therefore this was an unlawful arrest, and the police's own statement in effect confirms this. Anyway, let's look at some facts that are mentioned in passing about this, but not emphasised so much by the media. As the police statement confirms, this young woman is in fact 16 years old. That means she is underage for the purposes of the law in England and Wales. A local news article I found tells us that the young woman had been out at a pride parade or event of some sort with her sister. It was this sister who called the police, only after being unable to get in touch with their mother, who was asleep. The sister claims that this 16-year-old wasn't out of control as such, but she was worried as she was acting unsafe near the roads. In fact, elsewhere in the same article, it is basically admitted that she was drunk. The article also says this: the mum emphasised how her daughter was at no point violent towards the police officers after they'd taken her home, and the alleged remark to the officer had been made. She said the girl was punching a wall and having a total meltdown because she was mirroring the police officer's anger as she absorbs emotions. Unquote. Now, that could be true, but it could also be that the explanation for this young woman's behaviour is that she was drunk and the mother is just talking rubbish. The fact is this: she was found by police officers in the city centre drunk, and she had to be escorted home by the police in the early hours of the morning. It would appear she was so drunk that she had to be escorted home by police officers. How often do you hear of that happening? That gives us some important context. Now let's look at the law. It's not against the law in England and Wales for an underage person to drink, whether in public or private, but Section 91(1) of the Criminal Justice Act 1967 says that it is against the law for a person of any age to be drunk and disorderly in public. And Section 1491 of the Licensing Act 2003 makes it against the law for an underage person to drink or buy drinks in licensed premises, and to buy alcohol anywhere, whether the premises are licensed or not. I think it's likely she had been drinking in licensed premises because she was found in the city centre drunk, and if so, that is an offence. But even if she hadn't done this, she was still found drunk in a public place and had to be collected by the police after her sister expressed concerns about her behaviour, which does suggest she was drunk and disorderly, which is also an offence, as I've explained. All that context puts a very different complexion on the incident because it means What we have here is somebody who is inebriated and is behaving in a manner that raises concerns, whether or not it crosses a legal threshold for drunk and disorderly. If she is autistic, and to be clear, the label of autistic is freely given nowadays, often without any medical diagnosis, so we shouldn't assume that this reported fact is true. But if she is autistic, that is only of relevance in asking why her mother has allowed her to get into this situation. It's not the fault of the police that she's autistic. They've tried to help her and assure her safety. Apparently, it's claimed that she has some sort of physical condition. Again, that's not the fault of the police. It's her fault for getting herself into that situation in the first place. I do agree, however, that if somebody declares that they have certain medical problems, the police need to ensure that this is taken into account in how they treat that individual. I say that just to emphasise that I'm not giving the police a free pass in this incident. Now, it's a mother who was filming this incident in the home, and it's a mother who is loudly complaining to the police during the filming, but she doesn't stop to consider her own responsibility in this situation. She's allowed her socially vulnerable daughter, who is an underage female and she claims to be autistic, she's allowed her to go and get drunk in the centre of a major city. That's just asking for trouble. And her response is to point the finger at the police from behind the camera. Would you, as a parent, behave the same way? It's like the camera is a magic wand that excuses her from any responsibility. The camera allows her to point the finger at the police instead of herself. I know I'm being insensitive, but that's because I'm telling the truth. It's never nice when somebody tells the truth. It's not popular. Again, please understand that I'm not saying the police have done this right, but the mother had a job to do as well and could have avoided the whole thing happening if she had done that better. Shouldn't the mother be acknowledging that she has responsibility for this situation? And shouldn't the media also be making these same observations? Well, let's take a look at what the media say.
And founder of campaign group Fair Cop, that's Harry Miller. Good afternoon to you, Harry. What did you make of this video when you saw it? Do the police have a point, or does the teenager's mother have a point?
I was absolutely horrified. Absolutely horrified.
He's horrified. I better introduce this Harry Miller and give you some background. He's a former police officer, but that's by the by. That's not why they have him on the programme. In case you don't know, a few years ago he sued Humberside Police and the College of Policing because he was visited at work by an officer who told him he wanted to, I quote, check your thinking, after Mr. Miller had been reported for a tweet in which he made a remark about some transsexual person. It all sounds very silly really, but the court case was important because it changed police practices. Harry Miller is the reason that police forces in this country no longer record non-crime hate incidents. The quote at the beginning of this video from His Honour Justice Knowles is from the administrative court case which Harry Miller appealed to the Court of Appeal. The judgment of the Court of Appeal is 41 pages and the earlier judgment of the Administrative Court is more than 60 pages, and I include links to the judgments in the description. They are worth a read. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get back to Mr. Miller. He's horrified.
Absolutely horrified. Picking up a teenage girl from the city centre is par for the course. That's normal. Teenagers get drunk, they're picked up, they're taken home. No offence there whatsoever.
I know that this Mr. Miller was a police officer, so we do have to defer to his experiences to an extent, but being found drunk and disorderly is an offence, and being so drunk that you have to be escorted home by the police is not commonplace for anybody, let alone 16-year-old girls. It's not a good look, and it does put a different complexion on the incident, and I think Mr. Miller is wrong when he says that no offence was committed, when at the very least it could have been. In what follows, you'll notice I've had to blur out some of it because I don't want to show the young woman in the footage.
Once they were at their home address, the teenager allegedly said, you know, "Are you a lesbian? You look like my nan." Well, one, that's not an offence. Making a comparison with your grandma is not an offence. But two, even if the comment itself was wrong, you cannot have a public order offence in a private dwelling. You cannot. It is not possible. So the arrest was entirely unlawful. Now then,
I agree with what Harry Miller says there. No argument from me. Really, the interview should stop there.
Now then, let's look at it a little bit further. This was not just an arrest. This was not an unlawful arrest. As far as I'm concerned, this was a home invasion by an organised crime gang called West Yorkshire Police.
I don't think many of us really like the police. Many of us have a reason to resent the police for mistreating us, myself included, but I wouldn't describe the police as a criminal gang.
This was an armed kidnapping of a 16-year-old autistic girl because she happened to say West Yorkshire Police do not like. Every single one of those officers needs sacking. And the Chief Constable Robbins, he needs to go and needs to go before tea time.
So
I think police officers have to be allowed to make mistakes in the same way the rest of us do. But depriving somebody of their liberty unlawfully is a pretty serious mistake. And it's not just a technicality that the police have got wrong, which would be forgivable. They fundamentally misunderstood the law, and it would appear there was no good reason for the arrest anyway. As for the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, I think the reason Harry Miller wants him to resign is that both the Chief Constable and Harry Miller have political and social agendas, and they are opposed. Again, take your own view on it. I'll skip forward a bit.
If you and I raided unlawfully a person's house and assaulted a teenager and dragged them out and locked them up, we would be arrested for kidnapping.
That's not quite the same thing though, is it, Mr. Miller? You know that police officers are acting under a duty. If they go wrong in their duties, they can be disciplined and sometimes even prosecuted in the criminal courts. But your rhetoric, which you're shouting at us, doesn't help us understand anything.
This is a terror gang. This is a terrorist gang operating in West Yorkshire. Now, we've tried to appeal to West Yorkshire on many occasions and said you cannot take your understanding of the law from Stonewall, from Mermaids and from Pride. And their response is to block us.
It's not a terror gang. The officers were in the wrong. It's enough just to say that, but there also needs to be some balance in that the situation the officers were facing should also be acknowledged.
Now, we've tried to appeal to West Yorkshire on many occasions and said you cannot take your understanding of the law from Stonewall, from Mermaids and from Pride. And their response is to block us.
I do agree with that part of what Mr. Miller says, so I've played it again. I think the police in this country have a serious problem in that they are doing their work while guided by a set of values that have nothing to do with keeping the peace and tackling crime. But I think this interview by Harry Miller goes awry. His remarks are rabid and over the top. It would have been enough for him to have pointed out that while we don't know all the facts of the incident and rationale of the officers, if the young woman was arrested for saying something out of turn in her own home, that was not a lawful arrest, and given her age, the whole matter should have been looked into, including the behaviour of the mother who appears to have allowed her daughter to get drunk in public. If he had said something along those lines, I would have agreed with him. Let's look at somebody else.
I think, away from the legal stuff, when the officer says, when the mother says, look, she's autistic, and she says, I don't care, that is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know, you're supposed, as a police officer, I could be the tough guy, but you've also got to be compassionate. And I think what's happened here, there's been a bit of anger going on here, and something's been said previously, possibly, or whatever else, and it's all come to a head, and this girl's been grabbed and arrested. And I'm afraid it looks like she shouldn't have been arrested at all, because, as I've said, that it is not an offence.
Yeah.
If me and you are in my house and we have a row, that is not a public order matter because we're not in public.
Right, exactly. And if, for example, some police officer has been offended or has been in some way maligned and has been physically kind of attacked verbally rather than physically, unfortunately, you know, that's just part of the job, you know, and the police should be trained, should they not, to be maybe more tolerant than your average citizen, because they are going to be sworn at, they are going to be called names, they might be ridiculed. You know, surely they have to be better at reacting to that.
Well, absolutely, and that is what the courts take into account. So what the courts will say is that a police officer can't be the person offended by rude language and the like, because, of course, as a police officer, you get used to this. You know, my other half is a nurse, and she gets abused regularly when she, by drug addicts and whatever else. You call her all sorts of wicked names. But as a public sector servant, you just sort of get used to it and get on with it. And the remark made, "You look like my lesbian nana" or whatever, is hardly offensive at all. It's just a statement of fact from a kid who's got autism.
Exactly right. Well, let's have a look. We've got the video here. I think the first start of it is silent, but
I'm not going to show that here, but that's a much more level-headed discussion, and I agree with practically everything they've just said.
They don't seem to want to be talked out of it, do they?
No, they don't. And I think what the public will ask is, when you saw the initial video, there were 7 police officers there. Now, the detection rate for burglary in West Yorkshire and the rest of the country is something like 5%.
Right.
95 out of 100 crimes go unsolved. 99 out of 100 thefts go unsolved. And so, it's right that the police looked after this girl and she was found drunk and did a good thing and took her home rather than taking her to the cells or whatever. That's good, sensible, practical police.
Is it? Is it good policing? I'm not convinced. But anyway, I think the overall point he makes is a bit cheap, because he acknowledges that the police had a responsibility in this situation for the welfare of this young woman. But at the same time, he wants to upbraid the police for their inability to be everywhere at once. I think there is something in that criticism, a kernel of truth, in that the police do now have strange priorities, often, but there must be a reason why half a dozen officers are in that house. The whole incident was started by the young woman herself. She got herself drunk. The police didn't get her drunk. She made that choice. Her mother was so concerned about her own daughter that she was asleep when her other daughter was trying to get hold of her to report concerns about this young woman's behaviour, and that daughter was left with no option but to have the police come and collect the young woman. Some important context for you there, while all these talking heads take cheap shots at the police.
But also, it's turned into an absolute ridiculous situation where you've got 7 officers to arrest seemingly a 15 or 16-year-old girl, and the public will ask, why aren't they employed on better?
That's a good point, but as I've just said, 6 police officers didn't just turn up because somebody had made a homophobic remark. It's not clear at what stage other officers arrived and why. It could be that multiple officers were involved in escorting her home, or they arrived at the house subsequent to this. What we know is that she had been found drunk and had to be escorted home, a fact that this former police officer seems keen to gloss over. Here he makes another good point.
The tragedy is that the police rely on public support. I used to be told, who was dealing drugs, who had a gun, who did this, but people don't tell you those things unless they trust you. Right. And public trust in the police is ebbing away as the public see this. It's almost like the police are not on the public side.
I agree with that.
It's a whole cultural thing. The whole police has been wokeified, you might say, and promotions depend on not how many criminals you catch, but how woke. Yeah.
Next, I want to go to Douglas Murray, who was interviewed about this on Sky News.
Douglas, this is just appalling conduct by the police.
Look at them shaking their heads. I like that. It's a nice touch for the viewers. There's no mention anywhere in this interview with Douglas Murray that the young woman was drunk. Douglas Murray is the type of person who might upbraid a mother for allowing her daughter to get drunk in public underage, but he mentions nothing about it here.
Well done for intimidating and bullying this poor young girl who didn't do anything wrong.
Didn't do anything wrong? Well, being drunk and disorderly is an offence. Buying alcohol underage is an offence. Being drunk and having to be escorted home by the police is not exactly behaviour I should have thought you would approve of, Douglas.
Classic example, and you and I have talked about this before, of police forces that are able to police everything except crime.
Well, that's not true, actually, because she was found drunk, so it's actually an example of the police doing their duty. But they did make a mistake by arresting her in her own home. Nevertheless, she caused the whole incident by getting drunk in the first place, and her mother behind the camera was fast asleep when her other daughter needed help because the young woman was causing concerns. That puts everything in a different light, but Douglas here makes no mention of it.
Well, you make an excellent point there.
Does he? I don't think he makes an excellent point.
Because while the police take this hardline response to an autistic 16-year-old girl for the hate crime of noticing a police officer look like a lesbian grandmother.
But it wasn't just that though, was it? There's a background to this, as I've explained.
They are utterly hopeless in solving real crimes.
Are they? Well, I suppose we all have our complaints about the police. I certainly do. But isn't being drunk and disorderly a real crime? Isn't underage drinking a concern? Isn't getting so drunk that the police have to escort you home a concern? Isn't it a concern that the woman who filmed the police in her home is a mother who was asleep while her 16-year-old daughter was drunk in the centre of a major city? Aren't all those relevant points too? On the other side of this, I think we do have to accept that this does go deeper than just a mistake by some officers or a bit of overzealousness. There is a dominant value system now that places equality above even personal liberty, and of more immediate relevance, it's this value system that places equality and diversity above the need for standards. This has happened for lots of complex reasons. My personal belief is that leftism is a logical outgrowth of Christianity. It may be a twisting of Christianity in some ways, but nevertheless it's a result of it. This makes it very hard to argue rhetorically against it, because when you try to, it looks like you're arguing against high-minded moral ideals, so opponents of this dispensation are at a disadvantage from the off. But I'm getting off track. I want to come back to my main point, which is that virtually everybody has a camera in their pocket nowadays. And that camera has become a way to hold others accountable while overlooking your own accountability. Not that I'm some sort of moral paragon. I've done things wrong for which I should have taken more responsibility. It's in that spirit that I say, if you get yourself so drunk that the police have to escort you home, any complaints that you have to make about the police ought to be taken with a large pinch of salt. If you're the mother of a 16-year-old daughter and while you are asleep, the police have had to escort your daughter home, and she's so drunk that she's falling over, with respect, are you in a position to criticise those officers too much? I repeat though, the officers were wrong to make that arrest, but it's striking that one side demands full responsibility from the other for a mistake, while omitting to mention their own failings.